You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. The Prime Minister has touched down in the United States. It's been 48 hours since he reached the US. On day 3, he's expected to address the Summit of the Future at the UN. But let's start with the top stories you need to know. Prime Minister Modi, who is in the United States for his 3-day official visit, holds bilateral talks with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. The Prime Minister addressed tens of thousands of Indian Americans in a grand community event in New York's Long Island. He credited the Indians settled in the United States. The Prime Minister also met a host of industry leaders ranging from semiconductors to electronics to biotechnology. The Marxist leader Anura Kumara Dissanayake has won Sri Lanka's presidential election in what was viewed as a widespread rejection of the old political elite who are blamed for Sri Lanka's ongoing economic woes. An explosion caused by a gas leak at a coal mine in eastern Iran has killed at least 51 people. More than 20 others were injured after the blast in the South Khorasan province. 2.5 months after Labour came to power in the UK, a slight whiff of scandal is already wafting through Downing Street. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has suffered a fall in his personal rating since winning the election, according to a new poll for The Observer that comes before his first Labour conference as Prime Minister. Well, as part of his engagements on day 2 of his 3-day US visit, Prime Minister Modi met a host of industry leaders ranging from semiconductors to electronics to biotechnology, where they discussed the potential as long as the opportunities India has to offer. Now, among those who took part at the CEO roundtable were Chairman, President and CEO of Adobe Shantanu Narayan, CEO of Google Sundar Pichai, the CEO of IBM Arvind Krishna, Lisa Suchair and CEO AMD. Also, the top official from Moderna was there as well. But during the India-US bilateral meeting, President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi praised combined efforts to facilitate resilient, secure and sustainable semiconductor supply chains, including through global foundries, creation of the GF Kolkata Power Center in Kolkata, that will enhance mutually beneficial linkages in research and development as well in chip manufacturing. And addressing thousands of his supporters in Long Island, New York, Prime Minister Modi talked about his general election performance, highlighting his government's achievements in the past 10 years and the plans for the future, as he repeatedly praised the Indian diaspora. The Prime Minister said he had very big ambitions for his 3rd term and needed to move forward with 3 times the speed and strength. He also talked about freedom of expression in the recent elections being under scrutiny, as he praised the democracy in India and the diversity as well as the multiplicity of political parties and social media accounts. Prime Minister Modi announced the Indian government will actually open 2 new consulates in the United States, one in Boston and one in LA very soon. These remarks, though, were made during a community event on the 2nd day of his visit to the United States. Now, as you are aware, these rallies that you're seeing playing out on your screens at the moment, they have become key signature events on his foreign trips. They are used to connect with the Indian diaspora who are influential in the US industry and now increasingly, ahead of the November showdown, increasingly involved in politics as well. Underlining that leaders of the Quad grouping, which is India, the United States, Japan and Australia, were meeting amid global tensions and conflicts, our Prime Minister also said that they are not against anyone and all of them support a rules-based international order, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and the peaceful resolution of all issues. Mr. Modi's remarks during the 6th Quad Leaders Summit at Joe Biden's hometown of Delaware were a thinly veiled reference to China's aggressive behavior as far as the Indo-Pacific region is concerned. In fact, many analysts, some we were speaking to earlier on NDTV, also happened to say that China was the elephant in the room. but an action-packed schedule for the Prime Minister, as we have been extensively covering over the last 48 hours, and one more day to go. He talked up his general election performance, highlighted the government's achievements in the past decade, and also listed out the plans for the future, as he repeatedly praised the Indians abroad, the diaspora present in the United States. He also expressed that he had very big ambitions for his third term and they needed to move steadier with faster speed as far as their plan is concerned. My colleague Vishnu Shom has been tracking the latest developments for us on Ground Zero. He joins us live at the moment, looking nice and bright. Vishnu, what details can you disclose regarding the Prime Minister's bilateral meeting with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas? As you had highlighted, it was one of the biggest takeaways from his touchdown in the United States.
I do believe that that is the case. You know, the fact that you've got Prime Minister Modi meeting the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas today, just a couple of hours back, sends a very clear message that India is interested in peace in West Asia. The Prime Minister did talk about his concerns on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He did refer to the importance of peace in that region. The statements, the way this has been phrased by the External Affairs Ministry in a tweet is fairly direct. And it does go a long way to show that India is interested in peace as an arbiter in peace, potentially as a nation which has good relations with warring factions. So whether it's Ukraine or Russia or the Palestine and Israel. Remember, we have that great relationship with Israel. We are strategic partners with Israel, one of the largest importers of Israeli weaponry. We haven't really had very strong statements by India with regard to what is happening in Gaza. But now I think in that tweet where the Prime Minister has expressed his concern on the humanitarian situation, where he's had a meeting with the Palestinian president as well, I think a message is being sent that, look, we aren't just doing this as a one-off between Russia and Ukraine, as a voice of the global South, and as a nation which has had a historic connection with the Palestinian people, certainly have had a historic but far more recent equation, diplomatically at least, with the people of Israel, that we are friends of both sides. Now, India, again, never tries to push a solution to anybody, neither to Russia nor to Ukraine. And I suspect that we will not come to the table and saying that this is the way out of the present predicament that you find yourselves in. India wants to be of assistance. Ultimately, a solution to a peace lies between the warring factions, and India can help facilitate that process. India can make suggestions. We can encourage a peace process, but India certainly isn't a party that can find a solution, as it were. But as a voice of the global South, India does play an increasingly important role that's being accepted everywhere around the world.
As always, Vishnu, thanks so much for joining us with that crucial update from Ground Zero. In fact, we have an entire report lined up with the key takeaways from the Prime Minister's visit so far. Listen in.
Chants of Modi filled the air of New York Stadium as Prime Minister Modi addressed over 15,000 members of the Indian diaspora in the United States. From lauding the diaspora's role as India's brand ambassadors, discussing India's global role, to highlighting India's tech revolution. The Prime Minister's hour-long speech emphasized on the crucial connection between India and its diaspora in the United States.
मुझे आपको ये बताते हुए खुशी है कि आपके सुझावों के बाद भारत ने बोस्टन और लॉस एंजलिस में 2 नए कॉन्सुलेट खोलने का निर्णय लिया है.
The historic event in New York's Long Island came alive as over 500 artists came together to showcase traditional music and dance from various regions of the country. The event also saw big names such as hip-hop artist Humankind, Gujarati singer Aditya Gadvi, among others, enthralling the audience. In his address, Prime Minister Modi highlighted India's growing global force in ongoing conflicts, as well as the growing celebration of democracies between India and the United States.
भारत और अमेरिका डेमोक्रेसी के जश्न में भी एक साथ है. जहां अमेरिका में चुनाव होने वाले हैं और भारत में चुनाव हो चुके हैं, भारत में हुए ये इलेक्शन ह्यूमन हिस्ट्री के अब तक के सबसे बड़े चुनाव थे। हमने सेमीकंडक्टर सेक्टर को भी भारत की तेज ग्रोथ का आधार बनाया है। पिछले साल जून में भारत ने सेमीकंडक्टर सेक्टर के लिए इंसेंटिव घोषित किए थे। वो दिन दूर नहीं जब आप मेड इन इंडिया चिप यहां अमेरिका में भी देखेंगे।
Becoming the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Long Island in 75 years, Prime Minister Modi also announced that India will open 2 new consulates in Boston and Los Angeles, highlighting the deepening relationship between New Delhi and Washington. Bureau Report, NDTV World.
Well, with that, let's turn our attention now to the neighbourhood, to Sri Lanka, where the Marxist leader Anura Kumara Dissanayake has won Sri Lanka's presidential election in what was viewed as a widespread rejection of the old political elite, who are blamed for the country's ongoing economic woes. But for the first time in Sri Lanka's history, the election went into a runoff on Sunday after no candidate managed to get more than 50% of the votes. However, after second-choice votes were counted, Dissanayake was declared the winner in the evening. In fact, he said, "This victory belongs to us all." He posted this message on X. But this 55-year-old defeated the incumbent Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was installed as president back in 2022 after Gotabaya Rajapaksa was actually forced to resign and flee the country amid a popular uprising. In fact, joining us for further clarity on the matter, we have with us Sri Lankan policy analyst Rohan Samarajiva. Thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Suresh Goyal, who's former Indian envoy. Rohan, I'd like to begin with you. Since 2022, Sri Lanka has gone through a period of prolonged economic and political tumultuous times that we've been covering in India as well. It's left many disenchanted in your country with the parties and leaders that have dominated politics for about 2 decades. Are you now hopeful as your country starts a new chapter? Is there a mood of optimism on the streets of Colombo?
Well, the streets of Colombo are empty right now because this is a public holiday. I believe we have been optimistic since 22 and the change in regime. I believe that, to think about these kinds of events, there's value in international comparisons. I was just looking at the Greece numbers, and we have done way better than Greece did. It took them more than 10 years to recover. Our economy is now growing. Our reserves are up. Inflation is down to single digits.
Fortunately.
And so on. And debt restructuring is going on. So I think we have an interesting situation now with this government, which has serious constraints in what it can do. But it can do more on anti-corruption and things of that nature.
Dr. Goyal, meanwhile, it's feared that Sri Lanka's new Marxist leader is pro-China. Take us through what this new political chapter in Sri Lanka means for the neighborhood and India specifically. What do you believe it does?
I think immediately around the time that when he was elected, Mr. Dissanayake did make it very clear that he is not going to be basically taking a pro-China policies or do anything to hurt the strategic interest of India in the neighborhood. Therefore, we do hope that as the times come by, even though we know that in his policy pronouncement, in his utterances earlier, he has shown a pro-China inclination, but we do hope that having become the president, he will be looking at the long-term interests of Sri Lanka, keep the economic prospects in mind, and carry out the policies which will actually encourage the economic stabilization in Sri Lanka. Now, I'm saying that in that context, there are 2 important things. One is maintaining a peaceful neighborhood so that it does not create any issues in terms of security, etc.,
Indeed.
or stability. And number two, it continues to depend considerably on the restructuring through IMF. The earlier governments have seen that the restructuring of the debt has not been possible through China. China has always tried to take its own piece of cake in whatever they do. And even earlier, when the IMF tried to restructure the debt, China wanted to recover its debt before anything else, really. So I do hope that Mr. Dissanayake will keep all the factors in mind. Our interest basically is that Sri Lanka should not carry out any such policies which can hurt our own security interest. Remember when Rajapakse was removed, the huge possibilities of people migrating, moving towards India shows from Sri Lanka. So there are the factors here which come to mind, and I'm quite confident that Mr. Dissanayake will be actually keeping everything in mind before really taking any policy positions.
Well, we are certainly hopeful he does. Rohan, Mr. Dissanayake has pledged to renegotiate a 2023 International Monetary Fund $3 billion bailout that stipulated unpopular austerity measures. But as he takes office, take us through the immediate challenges he faces. We know top of his agenda is actually addressing Sri Lanka's dire economic situation.
Well, the immediate challenge that he will face is that he does not control the legislature. He has only 3 seats in a 225-seat legislature. He has vowed to call general elections. In Sri Lanka, the power is somewhat structured differently than in India. So we expect the general elections to be held in November. And given that he has only 43% of the vote, even with a broad coalition that he put together, it is likely that it will not yield a house that has a clear majority. He will try very hard to get that clear majority. With regard to the IMF, I think there has been a little bit of overstatement. He has said he will not withdraw from the IMF. He has only talked about the DSA, the Debt Sustainability Analysis, and presenting an alternative for discussion, he emphasized. Now, given that the private creditors, ISV holders have also come in with an agreement in principle based on the IMF DSA, it is unlikely that this part of the conversation will proceed any further.
Right.
So what we see is that he is highly constrained, at least until November, when he gets a decent representation in Parliament and is able to form a cabinet to his liking. Right now, his choices are between holding all the portfolios as a caretaker or having a 3-person cabinet with his party members. So I think this is not the time that we are going to see major changes on the economic front.
Right.
There will be some giveaways in order to win the election, some concessions on some taxes and things like that, that can be done through the executive rather than through
We'll
legislation.
keep a close eye on all the movements in the neighborhood. But thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us with the latest on what's happening in Sri Lanka. We will, of course, revert you for regular updates on the ramifications of the new government there. In other crucial news, Hezbollah launched dozens of rockets at Israel after a wave of Israeli strikes on Beirut and elsewhere in Lebanon. The strikes followed last week's explosions of Hezbollah pagers and walkie-talkies blamed on Israel that killed at least 39 and injured some 3,500 people. Israel appears to be giving Hezbollah, who's an Iran-backed militant group and Lebanon's largest political force, an implied ultimatum. This is what reports state, to either make a deal to pull back from Israel's northern border or go to war. Israel's stated goal is returning displaced Israelis back home in the country's north, but Washington is warning against war, with the White House National Security Advisor stressing that there are better ways to return those citizens. Well, news and updates continue in a moment right here on NDTV 24/7. We're taking a very quick break for now. Welcome back. A gas explosion in a coal mine in Iran's South Khorasan province has killed at least 31 people and injured 16. This is what the country's interior minister has said. Local media had reported earlier that 51 people were killed in the accident, which they said was caused by a methane gas explosion in 2 blocks of a privately owned mine. To the United Kingdom now, where 2.5 months after Labour came to power, a slight whiff of scandal is already wafting through Downing Street. Reports revealed a few days ago that British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had failed to declare within the required 28 days, as per parliamentary rules, gifts to his wife. Victoria Starmer, to the value of £5,000, these sums actually were paid by Wahid Ali, a generous donor to the Labour Party when he was opposition leader. They were mainly used to buy clothes. Keir Starmer is absolutely right that there is a substantial difference between declaration and corruption, because Keir Starmer, by the way, suggests he will continue accepting donors' gifts. Many point out that he should realize that there is a crucial difference between the appearance of greed and the sort of ethical leadership he and his party had promised. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has suffered a fall in his personal rating since winning the election, according to a new poll for The Observer that comes before his first Labour conference as Prime Minister. The latest opinion poll reveals that Starmer's approval rating has plunged below that of the Tory leader Rishi Sunak, suffering a huge 45-point drop since July. While 24% of voters approve of the job he's doing in the UK, 50% disapprove, giving him a net rating of minus 26%. Sunak's net rating is 1 point better. And a brief update from the US now, where Vice President Kamala Harris leads Republican rival Donald Trump by 5 percentage points in an NBC News poll that's been released. That found that respondents have come to see her more favorably since she emerged as the Democratic candidate for President of the United States. Well, thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.